Fine, excellent. Welcome all. Well, everybody's starting to arrive now. That's fantastic. Hello, good to see you. Well, virtually see you. So we're going to be pressing on today. All right, I have posted into the classroom the link to the new Nearpod. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump into the window because it's there. And go straight to the Nearpod, which is over here. And the code that you need is QXDE3. QXDE3. So the code should be in the classroom. It should also be up here in the top left-hand corner. So if you could all make your way into the Nearpod, I've got one in. Maybe I could get the rest of you in there as well. That would be fantastic. All right. Finding our way in. We've got everybody yet today. Okay. All right. Got a couple in. There we go. More of you going in. A couple more seconds to make your way in. Now, what we've been doing is we've been looking at elasticity, okay, price elasticity of demand, price elasticity of supply. We've been looking at concepts surrounding the calculation of them, what that all means, obviously different curves. We've been looking at the determinants of those. We've also been looking at who cares, what's the reason, why would consumers and businesses and the government maybe be interested in those, all right? Now we go back to looking at the market model again. I know it's jumping about a bit, but there's a reason why. And in this particular section, we're going to be thinking about how the government might actually intervene in the market model and why they might do that, okay? So it's reviewing some terminologies, all right? Equilibrium, disequilibriums, surpluses, shortages. It's thinking about ideas about efficiency and inefficiency, as well as a couple of new terms, all right? Maximum and minimum prices that we need to consider as well. All right. Okay, we've done that. Now, going to have a little bit of a look at what we know of as the interrelationships between different markets. Again, there's some terminology in here that's useful to add into your notes. All right, so when we talked about complement goods, when we talked about substitute goods, if you're looking at textbooks, you might see the complement good being described as joint demand, okay, where you're buying one good and it leads you to buy another good, all right, bread and butter, okay, cell phone and cell phone case. You buy them together. They usually are bought together. Substitutes, we said, were goods that were going to be purchased in replacement for each other. So again, in economics textbooks, you might see that referred to as competitive demand. So goods that are competing with each other with regards to demand. So you're going to, if you're looking at different books and different online sources, you might see these terminologies used. So always useful to have them in your glossary so that you know what that is. We're also wanting to introduce you to this idea here, derived demand. Derived demand is where you've got the demand for one product, all right? So if we take, for example, the demand for housing, right, for houses, then because there's an increased perhaps demand for houses, there's an increase in the demand for the people who build the houses. So that's classified as derived demand, where the demand for one good is found as a result of the demand for the other good. All right. So demand for cell phones leads to an increase in demand for the people who make the cell phones, for example. Okay. Then we've got this idea here, again, a new terminology, composite demand, where there is a product and the demand is just based on what it's used for. So there could be different uses for that particular product. Okay? So it might be a fairly obvious sort of product, but it may be used in different ways. So for example, oil is a classic example of having composite demand, because oil can be used in your car, but oil could be used to manufacture plastic. So therefore that's two different demands, right? Or composite demand. We can also talk about joint supply, right? Similar to joint demand. In this case, the goods are produced together, right? So that if there's a change in supply of one of the goods, it's going to lead to a change in supply of the other. Okay? So that then is classified as joint supply. So if you add those, grab them up, chuck them into your glossary so that you're able then to refer to them as you write and explain what is happening in different markets. Now I'm going to ask you a question. Here it comes. No, it doesn't. Here's an example first. Joint demand, washing machines and washing powder. Competitive demand, beef and pork. Derived demand, cars and steel, so the steel used to make the cars. Composite demand, oil for chemicals and oil for petrol. And joint supply, beef and leather. So always good to have examples included in your explanations. All right. Yeah, here's the question, I think, if I remember correctly. Here it is. Right, derived demand that we saw just before. What is it? Give us an example. You've got about 30 seconds. Go. All right, so having a go, what do you think derived demand was? And maybe give an example. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, that's good, Tracy. And then the other product.
Oh, shit. Okay.
Yeah, that's a good idea. And you? Yeah, I hadn't thought of that.
我发现七种效能后，能够从所需产品中所需有一定程度。
Just to let you know, someone's microphone's on. It's not a bad thing necessarily, but just saying. Yes, and that's it. Yes, good, Yeston. Very good. Yep, no, you're on the right path there. Yes, okay. Okay, waiting on a couple more. Have a go. Okay. Good. Excellent mention. Well done. Okay, so just an Andy and a Connor to have a go. All right. Okay. Good. Excellent, Connor. Well done. Okay, now do remember that this is all about terminology, and it's all about defining potentially these ideas, and yeah, there are a lot. Okay, and that's why having a glossary, a well looked at glossary and a well kept up to date glossary is very useful to have. And because the course goes on over a couple of years, you're going to get more and more and more terms that potentially need to be added to the glossary. It's like a language, yeah? But even if it is a language, there's still going to be like regional variances and different dialects and different understandings depending which part of the country you're in. So sometimes some of the words like we saw before, like joint demand and complement goods, they mean the same thing, but you're looking at them from perhaps two different angles, yeah? And you might see them written up in two different places in two different ways when they're meaning basically the same thing. Now, the government is going to intervene. Hold on, I have a noise for that. There it is. Right. The government is going to intervene. We've built our market model up. Now we're going to see what happens when the government tries to control it. So the first control that the government is going to try is called a maximum price. A maximum price. Sometimes the maximum price is called a price ceiling. The idea is it's a legally set limit. You can't go above that maximum price. You know? Oh, yeah. Andy, you might have your microphone on. All right? You can't go above that price. It's the ceiling. You can't go above the ceiling. All right? Usually, that price is set below the equilibrium price. Okay? Right? Because why are we doing it? Because we're assuming that the government is saying the equilibrium price is too high. People can't buy this good. So the government steps in and says, well, the market is too expensive for this particular product. Our people can't afford it. Therefore, we're going to set a maximum price on this particular product. Okay? So the idea is that they can't. They're going to set it below the equilibrium, because if they try and set it above the equilibrium, well, the equilibrium price is already less than that. So it will just go to the equilibrium. It is imposed by governments to improve availability, to maybe make things fairer, to make things more accessible to everybody. And it is quite often that they do these sorts of things during wartime. Right? There are some dangerous side effects to this intervention, and one of them we're going to see is about excess demand. Right? There's going to be a shortage. There could be underground economies or black markets created where people are selling the goods through illegal markets. Okay. One of the possible solutions to it could be to actually limit the quantity per person. You're only allowed one loaf of bread per week instead of two, all right? Or it could be some sort of a queuing system, a rationing system where, you get a loaf of bread on a Monday, a Wednesday, and a Friday, but not on a Tuesday and a Thursday. Yeah, you're going to put a maximum price on there. Now we're going to diagram it. Yay! All right. But first, why did we say a government might want to impose a maximum price? Where you go. Good work, Tracy. Well done. Yep, good. Well done, Ang Yi. Yeah, not about helping to reach the equilibrium necessarily. Thinking more about that first half there, about increasing the availability. The point being is that the equilibrium prices seem to be too high, too expensive for everyday consumers. They can't afford it. Right? They don't have the income to get there. So they are priced out of this market. So the government then says, okay, well, we will fix the price. We will put the price lower than the equilibrium price so that you can afford it. Yeah, Connor, I'm asking about why they might put a maximum price in, yeah? Oh, that's a good idea, Isaac. Well done. Good work, Min Ching. Yes, yes, and that's absolutely right. Need to know that what that means, though, but yes. Yes, Tawish. One I really like is this one Isaac did. All right. Idea being the price is lower, it's more affordable, more people can buy it. Yes, there's a higher demand, and it might actually reduce relative poverty. All right. Not sure where you found that one from, Isaac, but it is very good. All right. Ta-da! Hold on, I need my sound effect. Where did it go? All right, there it is, the diagram for a maximum price. All right, now there's our equilibrium price here, so we need to go through this carefully. There's our equilibrium price. Feel free, you can screenshot these, remember, and put them in your notes, yeah? There's your equilibrium price, equilibrium quantity. That's too high, the government says, that's too expensive for everyday consumers. It might be that this particular product is an essential product. It might be that consumers have lower incomes and they can't afford this particular product. Whatever the decision is, the government has said this is too expensive. So in this case, we're using bread as an example, but it could be rice, it could be petrol, I don't know. Right? Anything the government considers to be maybe a necessity. Right, so here we go. We're going to put a maximum price. So on the labeling side, on the axis, we do P-max. All right. Then we're going to do, and it's going to be a solid line all the way across because it's a law. It's the law, and ideally it's going to go all the way through the diagram, all the way, and just keep going. Okay, because it's the law at that price. That's the maximum. That's the ceiling. Yeah, and labeling wise, we tend to also write maximum price here on this side as well, just so that you can see it on both sides. As we follow it along, we see it hits the supply curve first, and so if we drop down, this then becomes the quantity supplied at that price, because that's all producers can afford to supply at that particular price. Producers were supplying this quantity, so the quantity supplied has actually decreased. Right? We're wanting more bread in the market, but we've actually decreased the amount of bread in the market. Right? Then it goes along, it keeps going along, it hits the demand curve over here. Look, yes, it worked in the sense that there's more people wanting bread, increase in quantity demanded for bread, but there's less supply of bread, less quantity supplied of bread. So there's going to be an excess of quantity demanded, this one, over quantity supplied, this one. In other words, there's going to be a shortage of bread. There's not going to be enough bread.
Wait, Mr. David?
Sorry, hold on.
Okay.
We needed to get the done. Yes?
So does the Q1 means that like the supply of it, and the Q2 means the demand of it?
Q1 is quantity supplied, yes, and Q2 is quantity demanded. Absolutely right.
Okay.
All right. And because there's that gap between them, there's that shortage. Now, the scary thing is that this is a law, okay, which means that it's not going to go away. The government has put this in place. Remember, we talked about the market model and how it was a self-regulating model, and you turn the taps on and then the water flowed down the drain. Well, it can't here. You've put a giant plank of wood across the sink, right? Turn on the taps and all that's going to happen is you're going to end up with a flood. It will not ever return to an equilibrium whilst this Pmax is in place. It can't. And it's going to have those effects. It's going to have that shortage going on. It's also going to create parallel markets. It's going to create people who can, they can see that there's going to be all these people who want the product and can't get it. So they're going to go and they've got the money, so they're going to go and buy them, and then they're going to go into the second-hand market, the illegal underground economy perhaps, and go, want to buy a loaf of bread? Yeah. And you will then have unregulated markets, and they will be charging huge amounts of money for a loaf of bread. And again, the people that we're trying to help here, are we actually helping them? Well, they've got a lower price. So some people will be helped. Yes, it will be more affordable, but there's going to be less of the product available. So there's going to be a whole lot of people here that aren't helped with this particular situation. Right? So a maximum price. The government has tried to intervene in the market model, and we've actually decreased the efficiency of it. Here we were efficient. We had supply equaling demand. We had all the resources that we needed to make our product. Now we're down here. We've got a shortage created. The government has intervened, created a shortage. Therefore, you've got an inefficient market. You've got a situation where there's what's called a misallocation of resources, which isn't a contestant in Miss Universe. All right. Now, you've seen the diagram, you've heard the explanation, so you can guess what you're going to have to do now. Have a go yourself. Where you go. Good work, keep going. Oh, looking good. All right, keep going. Good work, Jason. You can see why it was important to have all that practice in drawing market models. Good, Connor. Good, nice straight line. Keep going, Isaac, doing well. I know it's not easy trying to do it on the computer. Good work. Work, Lynn. Keep going, Connor. Good. The only thing I would say, Lynn, is maybe if we wrote excess demand, if that could be on this axis down here. I know it wasn't in the actual diagram. I know, right? One of my personal feelings about these sorts of models is that we should have these titles on the axis. So in particular this one, because it's talking about the quantities. So having it down there. Also, I would add a label here. Right? I would add a label here to say that it is the maximum price. Right? Yes, good work, Ang Yi. We haven't labeled on the price axis, cool. But otherwise it's looking quite good. So if you were to do a label on the price axis showing the equilibrium price and then the price max, right? And even over here, that would be awesome. Good work. Okay. Another minute or so. Good work, Isaac. Haven't labeled the curves, supply and demand. Yes, very good, Lynn. Again, label the curves, supply and demand, that would be good. Yeah, that's good, Wenqing. We haven't got the original equilibrium price and quantity illustrated. And if we are, I know, yeah, do the dots to illustrate the different quantity and the different quantity supplied and the different quantity demanded. That would be helpful. Now, I know the difficulty trying to do it on the computer. I know. Work handy. Got another minute. Okay. Right, with these sorts of models, you are going to need to practice them. Yeah, I know this is the first time you've seen them, but practice does make perfect. All right. And I mean, in the old days, it used to be just go up to the whiteboard and draw them and redraw them. But you might have pen and paper at home and, you know, turn it over, redraw it, check it, make sure you got it right. It's very easy just to rely on an image in your notes, right? But eventually you might have to actually draw it, in which case you need to do the mechanics of the drawing of it. Plus, it's fun. Gosh, that's good. Very good, Wenching.
Mr. David?
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yes, do. Go ahead.
Like, if let's say, if a market was at a equilibrium, and then somehow the government decided to put a max price on it, what will happen to a previous market? Would it just drop down to the max price?
Yes. Yeah.
But then what happens to all the excess supply or demand?
Well, if it's a maximum price, like the one you've just illustrated, it's going to be a shortage that will be created. All right.
Oh.
That will happen. Yeah.
So all the excess demand, supply and demand would just drop down to where the government sets it?
Yeah, well, because it becomes the new price. It becomes the new legal price. All right, so the maximum price becomes the new legal price. All right, so therefore they can't price any higher than that. So they're not going to supply any more in the market other than this quantity here, because that for them is what it costs them to produce. All right, so they will supply that quantity there. The consumers, however, because the price has fallen, we know because of the law of demand that there's going to be an increase in quantity demanded. And so we see that, there's that increase there. So quantity supplied decreases, quantity demand increases, and now we've got a disequilibrium. We've got a shortage occurring between the quantity demanded and the quantity supplied. So there's a shortage. There's not enough in the market. And remember, quite often this is put in place to protect people, to help consumers, to make products more affordable for them. And yes, it kind of does, all right? But it does leave you with that shortage. So even though the goods are cheaper, you just can't get them. So you remember all the way back we talked about command economies and why they may or may not work. Well, government trying to set a price. Look at what happens. All right, but wait. It gets worse. All right, because then we have what's called a minimum price. All right, so you had a maximum price. Now you're going to have a minimum price. Now a minimum price is also sometimes called a price floor, as in it's a legal limit below which the price can't go. So the price can't go below that level. And a minimum price is usually set up to protect the producers. All right, they're worried it might be that it's a product that your economy relies on. Okay, so here in Malaysia, it might be palm oil, for example. Yeah, and so the government says we need a minimum price because otherwise the farmers aren't going to get what they need, and then their incomes go down, and then all right. So therefore, they're going to try and protect those producers, those suppliers. They're going to try and guarantee them a minimum price or a price floor. Okay. Yeah, okay, that's nice, and that's a really good sentiment, and we've got some real life examples. Remember, these are things that have actually been tried, and in many parts of the world are still in place. Now, we have a lot of minimum prices surrounding the agricultural markets all around the world. There will be minimum prices attached to agricultural markets, okay, especially if we consider places like the EU, which isn't a word you use when you've stepped in something that you don't like. EU! All right, no. It is the European Union. Now, another example is actually called a minimum wage. All right, the idea that you can have a wage rate for people in the labor market, because remember, we're in the labor market. All right, so we are a good being sold in that particular market. And the government might think, oh, those wages are a bit low, let's put a legal minimum there. Okay. And that minimum wage, if you've been following the news out of America, which, yes, is terrifying, okay, absolutely. But if you have been following the news out of America, you will have noticed that America is actually increasing in some states their minimum wage. Some of their states it's going up to $15 US an hour, which sounds like a lot. And if you were to convert it to Malaysian ringgit, it would be a bit, yeah. but you've got to multiply it by 4, I think. But in America, $15 an hour, cost of living wise, yeah, probably not going to give you what you think it's going to give you. The side effect of these minimum prices, okay, is going to be that there will be potentially an excess supply created. There's going to be a surplus. So we're going to have to do something about the surplus. We need to have a think about what we could possibly do. And remember, these things are actually in place all around the world. They've been tried in the past, and they continue to be used. So what a minimum price is, what do you think it actually is, and what consequences might happen if we put one in place? You've got about 30 seconds starting now. Here we go. Good work, Tracy. Good work, Angie. Yeah, good, Connor. Good work, Yasin. You've added the word probably in there. It suggests a degree of uncertainty. And you've also talked about lower demand. Yeah, possibly lower quantity demanded, but we'll get to that. It's all right, but very good. All right. Going to move on. Sorry, Andy, but we need to move on to here. Diagramming, which sounds Scottish. Right, so there's your original equilibrium here, original equilibrium quantity and price. And what has happened is that price the government has said is too low. That the government, in this case, is looking at the wheat producers, so it's an agricultural product, and wanting to support them, wanting to protect their income, wanting to make sure that they have a real higher income. So they put in a minimum price, and we notice the labeling, min price, minimum price, okay? It's a solid line because it's a legal minimum, and it does go all the way across. It needs to go all the way across, otherwise the examiner gets a bit stressed with you. All right, intersects here with the demand curve, so we drop the line down, and so that price, because the price has risen, we see a decline in the quantity demanded. So we were quantity demanding this much, we're now quantity demanding that much. So we've got a decline, a decrease in quantity demanded. On the other side, if we follow it all the way along, it hits the supply curve here, right? So we see an incentive for them to increase their production, and so the quantity supplied increases. So we've ended up here with a excess of quantity supplied over quantity demanded. So you end up with what's called a surplus. And what on earth do you do with the surpluses? Well, this is the government, remember? This is the government putting these things into place. So the most obvious thing that the government can do to try and help people with this. Here, I'm going to stop the sharing and I'm just going to jump straight back to the meat. Just like that. All right. 18. All right. So the most obvious thing that the government can do is it can actually buy up the surplus. Right? The market is creating a surplus. The government wants that income to be higher for those producers. So the government can just buy it up, put it in a warehouse somewhere, sell it to one of their friends, I don't know, and that's what quite often happens. And it's ridiculous. It's really quite frightening how bad that goes, right? They did it in New Zealand a long, long time ago. The New Zealand government decided that it wanted to protect the income of farmers, of sheep farmers, because the price of wool was dropping worldwide. And New Zealand government was a little worried about that. So the New Zealand government put a minimum price in for wool. Okay, it did exactly as the model said. It created this huge surplus of wool, that comes from the sheep. All right. What did the New Zealand government do with it? Well, they had to buy it in order to keep the price where they wanted it to be. Yeah. And then what do you do with the wool? All right, run around with it. Yeah. So they had to store it. Well, one of the places that the New Zealand government owned was schools. So I am not kidding you. Without word of a lie, they bundled up all the wool and they put it into the schools, all right, into the gyms, the sports halls, the assembly halls, wherever there was big, high cavernous ceilings, that's where they put the big bales of wool, all right? Crazy, Now, two things saved New Zealand at the time with regards to all of this wool, because what on earth do you do with it? Because the farmers keep producing more and more wool, But two things happened. First thing that happened was the Russian economy collapsed. All right, and when the Russian economy collapsed, they had no money. They were going into a massively cold winter, and there was a real worry internationally that the people in Russia were going to freeze to death. All right, so they didn't have clothes, adequate clothes. So the New Zealand government sent a whole lot of this wool over to Russia for them to turn into clothes so that they could survive the winter. So that's thing one that happened that helped us get rid of the surplus, right? Second thing that helped us get rid of the surplus was there was a massive tanker of oil, and it hit something, and the oil started leaking into the ocean. Big problems, as you can imagine, all right? So the New Zealand government and their scientists worked out that because wool floats, all right, so they created these giant, like, sausages made of wool, okay, big ones. And they took them all the way out to this oil spill, and they got purchased by the world community, and good for us, and it floats on the water, and it creates like a natural barrier around the oil spill, and it prevented the oil spill from drifting further and further out, okay, because the oil soaks into the wool, and the wool floats on the water just as the oil floats on the water. So it was a brilliant idea, it really was. But it saved the New Zealand economy because we had all the surplus wool. What we're going to do with it, So that's what happened. But then if you look at the EU, right, we talked about the EU, right, with their subsidies, they subsidized so much, they had so much surplus butter that in the textbooks you'll read they had an actual butter, it was like they had a butter mountain. They had that much butter stored in warehouses. They had that much wine stored in warehouses that they referred to it as a wine lake, It's that kind of craziness that occurs when the government is trying to intervene in an economy. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to close off the meat, okay? I'd like you to review these concepts, their new models, different changes, right? Before we can see you again next week, right? If possible, okay? That would be a good thing to do. We will pick this up again next week and have another look through. There is also going to be a bit of a practice question that you're going to be able to run through. There's also a few things that appear in the classroom from time to time. And if you're a bit behind in some of the work, you might, if you could, catch up on that, that would be fantastic. And if there is work that I've fed back to you and said, hey, look, what about this part? Right, maybe have a look at the feedback, make some changes to that work, and then you can resubmit it, okay? And that always is a lot better, okay? Then it's the learning of it, all right? So we will finish up there for today. I'm going to post a link to the recording when it's downloaded I will also obviously post the instructions, etc. Otherwise, as we say in the land of my birth, e konera, which means goodbye for now.
Okay, thank you, Mr. David.
Thank you, Mr. David.
Thank you. See you.
Thank you, Mr. David.
Thank you. You still there, Yasin? You're all right. Good boy.